My name is Adaorda, and my father, Mr. Chuka Naji, used to be a famous radio man. People say his voice used to fill the whole of Enugu in the old days, back when radio was the only thing everybody listened to. But now, he is just an old man who sits alone in our small sitting room every night, playing his old recordings like they are his best friends. Every evening after dinner, he will clean the same old table where he keeps his radio. The radio is brown, cracked, and missing one knob. It doesn't even play well anymore. You will just hear small sound coming from it, like when rain is about to fall. But Papa will still sit there, bend his ear close, and listen like he can hear something deep inside. Sometimes I see tears coming down his face. At first, I thought it was just how old people behave when they miss their past. I would laugh and tell him to come and watch TV with me, but he would just shake his head and say that the TV cannot talk to his heart the way the radio does. I didn't understand what he meant. One night, when I woke up to drink water, I heard his voice from the sitting room. I tiptoed and peeped. He was sitting beside the radio again, the light from the small bulb above his head making the tears on his face shine. His lips were moving. At first, I thought he was praying, but when I listened closely, I heard him calling a name. He was saying, "Neka, forgive me." "Neka, can you hear me?" I froze. Who was Neka? My mother's name was not Neka. Mama's name was Ifeoma, and she died when I was still in secondary school. I had never heard Papa call any woman's name apart from hers. The next morning, when I asked him who Neka was, he looked at me like I'd caught him doing something bad. He tried to smile and said it was just an old name from one of his radio programs. But his voice was shaky. I knew he was lying. That day, I started watching him closely. He would spend his whole afternoon cleaning old cassette tapes and arranging them like they were gold. When I tried to help him, he would tell me not to touch them. In the evenings, he would play one tape and sit for hours, staring at the radio like he was waiting for it to speak back to him. I began to feel sorry for him. Maybe he missed his old life too much? But something inside me said there was more to it. There was something he was hiding. One Sunday afternoon, when he went out to buy fuel for his generator, I sneaked into his room. It was full of old things, certificates, black and white photos, and cassette tapes with his handwriting on them. I opened one box, and right there, under some dusty papers, I saw a picture of Papa when he was younger. He was standing beside a beautiful woman. Her name was written at the back of the photo. It said, "Me and Neka, 1972. My heart started beating fast. I sat down on his bed and kept staring at the picture. The woman had a bright smile, and her hand was on Papa's shoulder. They looked happy. Too happy. I didn't know who she was, but I knew one thing that moment. My father's tears every night were not just about old memories. They were about this woman. The woman in the picture. The woman he still called in his sleep. The woman named Neka. That picture of Papa and the woman called Neka stayed inside my mind the whole night. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how he called her name like someone who lost something he could never find again. I wanted to ask him about her, but I was afraid he would shut me out. He had become quiet these days, always lost in his own world, as if the past was the only thing keeping him alive. The next evening, after work, I came home early. He was in the sitting room again, cleaning his radio. I sat and watched him. The way his hands held that radio, you would think he was touching a baby. The small sound coming from it filled the room, that same soft crack noise. I wanted to tell him that maybe he should rest, but I just kept quiet. After a while, he started playing one of his old cassettes. His voice came out, young and lively, introducing a program. I had heard that voice all my life, but this one sounded different. It was full of joy. Then I heard a woman's laughter in the background. Her voice was light, sweet, and full of life. Papa stopped the cassette and just stared at it. He closed his eyes, and I saw tears rolling down again. Something inside me told me that was Neka's voice. That night, when he went to bed, I went back to his room. I wanted to find out who she really was. I opened the same box again, this time searching deeper. Under some old letters tied with a ribbon, I found one paper folded neatly. The paper had brown edges like it had been there for many years. It was a letter. The handwriting was fine and careful, but the ink was fading. It started with the words, "My Chuka. If you ever see this, Know that I am alive. I sat up. My heart began to beat faster as I continued reading. The letter said Nneka had survived the bomb that destroyed their radio station during the war. She said she was hiding in Onitsha with her aunt and that she was pregnant. She wrote that she didn't know if he was still alive, but that she would name the child after him if she never saw him again. I held the letter and my hands began to shake. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My father had another child somewhere, a child he never told anyone about. When I looked up, I saw Papa standing by the door. I didn't even hear him come in. His face was pale and his eyes were red. He looked at the letter in my hand and sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then his voice came out, low and heavy, like someone carrying a big load. He told me he thought Nneka had died during the war. He said people told him the radio station was destroyed and everyone there was gone. He said he searched for her after the war, but he never found her, and no one knew where she went. I asked him if he believed what was in the letter. He nodded. He said he found it many years later inside one of his old radio scripts, when he was already married to my mother. He said that was the day his life changed, because he knew somewhere in this world there was a child who carried his blood but didn't know him. That night, he cried like a small boy. I sat beside him, not knowing what to say. For the first time in my life, I saw my father as a man who was not strong, not bold, not the famous voice of Enugu. I saw him as a man who had lost everything that made him happy. When I went to bed that night, I made up my mind. I was going to find that child. The next morning, I woke up with a new kind of fire in my heart. I looked at my father while he was sitting quietly at the dining table, sipping his tea. He looked tired, as if the night had stolen his strength. I told him I would be going out to run some errands, but what I really wanted was to start searching for Nneka's child. I didn't even know where to begin, but something told me that if I started from the radio world, I might find something. I went straight to the old Eastern Voice FM building, the place where Papa used to work before he retired. The building had changed, but the smell of the place still reminded me of my childhood when he used to take me there after school. I met one of the old staff who used to work under Papa. His name was Uncle Jude, a tall man with white hair and a deep voice. When I mentioned Papa's name, his face lit up immediately. He told me stories about how good Papa and a woman named Nneka were on air. He said the two of them had a show that everybody in the East used to wait for every evening. They were like stars. I asked him if he knew what happened to Nneka after the war, and his face changed. He said he heard she ran to Onitsha with her aunt, but no one ever saw her again. I thanked him and collected some old documents from the station's archive room. Some of the papers were torn and brown, but as I turned through them, I saw Nneka's name written on one of the old radio rosters. She had signed her name beside a date, and beside her name was written Voice of Hope program. I carried the paper home and showed it to Papa. When he saw the paper, his hands began to shake again. He touched her name slowly, like someone touching something holy. Then he told me that Voice of Hope was the last program she ever presented before the bomb hit the station. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went online and started searching for any broadcast from that era that might have survived. I found a small digital archive run by some old broadcasters who had transferred old tapes into computer files. I wrote to them and begged them to check if they had any recording of Nneka's programs. 2 days later, I got a reply. They said they found one old recording labeled Voice of Hope, 1969. I played the file, and when I heard her voice, I felt chills all over my body. Her tone was calm but heavy with fear, like someone who knew something bad was about to happen. Then suddenly, I heard a loud sound in the background, and the tape ended halfway. I sat there in silence. My heart felt tight. I knew that must have been the moment the bomb fell. I closed my eyes and whispered her name, as if I could reach her through time. The next day, Papa saw me listening to the tape and just stood behind me without saying anything. When it finished, he said in a weak voice that he used to listen to that same broadcast every night through his old radio, hoping one day her voice would continue from where it stopped. He said that was why he never threw away the broken radio. That was when I made a promise in my heart that I would find the child she talked about in her letter. I didn't care how long it would take. Somewhere in this country, there was someone who shared my blood, someone who deserved to know the truth about who he was. The search took me weeks. I went through every name, every old record, every hint that could lead me to Nneka. Most of the time, I felt lost. Some people I met said they remembered her. Others said they had never heard of her. It was like she had lived and disappeared into thin air. But I didn't stop. Something inside me kept pushing. I wanted to find that missing part of my father's story. One afternoon, while I was sitting in my office, I received an email from a woman who worked with the Broadcasting Museum in Onitsha. I had sent her a message earlier asking about old records of broadcasters from the 1970s. She said she found a file with the name Nneka Okafor. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I called her immediately and begged her to send me everything she had. When the documents arrived, I opened them slowly. There was an obituary. It said, Madam Nneka Okafor, aged 71, died 5 years ago. I stared at the picture for a long time. Her eyes were the same ones from the photo I found in Papa's box. She still had that same bright smile, even in old age. But beside her in the obituary picture stood a man in his 40s. He looked so much like Papa that I dropped the paper. His name was written as Chidi Okafor, her only son. I sat there shaking. I didn't need anyone to tell me. That was him. That was Papa's son, the one she said she was pregnant with. That evening, I went to Papa's room with the obituary in my hand. He was sitting beside his radio again, his eyes far away as usual. I placed the paper on his lap. At first, he didn't understand what he was looking at. Then, his eyes reached the photo. His hand covered his mouth, and he let out a sound that broke my heart. He whispered Nneka's name and began to cry quietly. I told him about Chidi. I told him I would find him. Papa held my hand and said he didn't think he was strong enough for that. He said he didn't deserve to meet him after all these years. I told him it wasn't about what he deserved. It was about peace. The next morning, I took a bus to Onitsha. The city was busy and hot, but I didn't mind. I went to the Broadcasting Museum first and showed the woman there the obituary. She smiled and said she knew the son. She said he worked as a radio presenter at Onitsha City FM. My heart jumped again. It felt like history was repeating itself. I went straight to the station. When I entered the building, I heard a man's voice coming from one of the studios. His voice was deep, clear, and full of warmth. It sounded just like Papa's. I stood by the glass window and watched him speak into the microphone. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. When he came out, I walked up to him. He greeted me politely, not knowing who I was. I told him I was looking for the son of Madam Nneka Okafor. He nodded and said that was him. I told him I was the daughter of Chuka Naji. He froze. The smile disappeared from his face. He looked at me for a long time, as if searching for truth in my eyes. Then he whispered that his mother had told him stories about a man named Chuka who used to work with her at the radio station. The man she said was his father. My throat became dry. I told him his father was alive. When I returned to Enugu, Papa was sitting in the same place, the radio in front of him as always. I stood by the door for a while, just watching him. His hands were shaking a little, but his eyes were calm, like he had already accepted that his story might never be complete. I sat beside him and told him softly that I had found Chidi. He didn't say anything at first. Then he looked at me slowly, his lips trembling. He asked if I was sure. I told him I had seen him with my own eyes. I told him he was a broadcaster too, just like him. For a long time, Papa didn't move. He just stared at the floor. Then he said he didn't know what he would even say if he met the boy. He said too many years had passed and that maybe Chidi would hate him. I told him he would never know unless he tried. 2 days later, I brought Chidi to Enugu. The car ride was quiet. He kept looking out of the window, his hands resting on his lap. I could feel his heart racing, even though he didn't show it. When we reached the house, Papa was standing by the door. He looked older than ever. His shoulders bent a little. His eyes filled with tears, even before a word was spoken. Chidi stopped a few steps away from him. For a few seconds, no one said anything. The air was heavy, and even the birds outside seemed to go silent. Then Papa said in a weak voice, "I am sorry." Those were the only words he could say before his tears came. Chidi stepped forward slowly and held him. That was all it took. Two men, strangers for a lifetime, holding each other in silence, feeling the years that war and distance had stolen from them. Later that evening, I made them sit in the sitting room. Papa took out his broken radio, the same one he had kept for decades. He placed it on the table and turned the dial gently. A soft, crackling sound filled the air. Then, faintly, Nika's voice came through. It was that same last recording from long ago, the one from the day of the bombing. Her voice was shaking, but still full of hope. She said, "If this is my last broadcast, tell Chuka I will always be listening." No one moved. Papa's eyes filled with tears again, and Chidi covered his face with his hands. I sat there between them, my chest heavy, my heart full. The old radio made a soft pop sound and went silent. It never came on again. Papa leaned back in his chair and smiled, the kind of smile I had never seen before. He said she had finally stopped waiting. He said maybe now she could rest. Chidi held his hand, and I sat beside them, feeling peace fill the whole room. That night, for the first time in many years, Papa didn't play any recording before sleeping. The radio sat quietly on the table, broken but now at peace. When I went to check on him before bed, he was already asleep, his face calm and gentle, his fingers still resting on the side of the radio, as if he was holding Neka's hand one last time.